All right. Okay. When we get into the subject of end-of-life issues, there can be some words that strike us as too big of words. And I don't want you to be intimidated by them because it really is kind of easy to understand. I'm not going to give you a lot of techno speak here, but what we're going to do here is we're going to examine the benefits versus the burdens of treatment. Because, I mean, that's what it comes down to, the benefits and the burdens. Is this treatment beneficial or is it overly burdensome? And the way that we're going to measure those is by these two principles where we basically speak about ordinary and proportionate means of treatment, or by extraordinary or disproportionate. Don't get hung up by what those larger words on the right mean, but basically think of it as the reasonable versus those that, wow, you know, we really got to think about this before we say yes or no to that particular treatment. So ordinary proportionate treatments versus extraordinary disproportionate treatments. And we use these to help us to actually determine the benefits and the burdens of a proposed treatment. Next slide. Along with this, we are going to talk about assisted nutrition and hydration, which is very important because I bet you, I'm not going to ask for show of hands, but I bet you many of you have living wills. And in there you may have something that would be very, very problematic. And the reason why I told you that story about being the best behaved Marine in Thailand, only to be punished with a really, really, really bad, whatever it was, is because dehydration is agonizing. Agonizing. And our death certificate should not say death by dehydration, because that's all the removal of nutrition and hydration, starvation and dehydration. You can live longer without food, but you can't go wrong without hydration. And the reason why they call it comfort measures is because they got to pump a lot of morphine in you to make you not feel so terribly in pain because of the dehydration. And then we're going to talk about quality of life. That is the banner phrase of the promoters of euthanasia. Sounds good. You got a good argument, but nothing that we endure in our life, no matter how debilitating, how crippling it may be, changes the dignity of who we are. We may not be able to do some things, but we are still precious in the eyes of God, and nothing has changed in the eyes of God. And then we're going to examine some of the pitfalls, some of the living wills, and the alternative that we have in our packets. And this is where we have to be very attuned to what's in your packet, because you'll notice in the first 2 pages on the right side, you have the appointment of, you have the advanced care plan, which is a living will. And the nice thing about it is it's a diocesan approved, Catholic approved by the National Catholic Bioethics Center, living will or advanced directive, and you don't need a lawyer to prepare it. All you need is 2 witnesses, and it's a legal document. I've used it I don't know how many times. My hospital stays, my surgeries, my father, his care. And the other one, which is only 1 page, is the appointment of healthcare agent. So this is someone that you trust to make decisions for you if you are incapacitated. So they should, if they're not Catholic, be somebody that understands why it's important that they abide by certain aspects of which we are going to speak of. And then behind that is a stapled packet on the right side that has essentially a 4-page document that speaks to it's basically an explanation of those 2 documents that I just showed you. Very easy to read and understand. They have their own sample advanced directive or appointment of healthcare representative after it. But please just use these because they are most excellent. I also have the ethical religious directives, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. But then there's a Catholic guide, and the word NCBC is the National Catholic Bioethics Center. They are the trusted agents. They are the advisors to the bishops on all issues of Catholic bioethics, and they are excellent. That's who I got my certification through. And their guide to palliative care and hospice is a must-read. I'm not going to be covering that subject, not the hospice especially. I'll cover pain management a little bit, but these are for you to read over, and it's important that you do your homework. Like you're invested, that you're prepared for your retirement. These are the things that you need to prepare for the things that we all know await us. And then there's the sample pulse form, the physician's order for life-sustaining treatment, and they have a guide to completing that. That is, it sounds a little complicated, but they do an excellent job of explaining it, and you will be presented with that at some point in hospitalization. So it's very important that you read through that. And then if you want to know a little bit more on nutrition and hydration, there's that. And then I've had an article there on euthanasia. So those are the important documents to understand. Next slide. 7 guiding principles. The task of medicine is to care even when it cannot cure. So we have stewardship over our lives, but not absolute dominion. We are stewards of our life. We're not God. That's why we can't play God. Food and water, number 3, food and water are not medical treatment. Do not let anybody make you believe that food and water are a form of compassionate treatment. They're not. It falls under the category of ordinary care, like keeping a person clean and comfortable. If you've fallen into this because you did not know, you join many others, okay? It happened once. Understand, though, the medical professionals are pushing the removal of nutrition and hydration. It's unconscionable. And we have to understand it in the proper context. Okay, so there's an obligation, number 4, obligation to use the ordinary, proportionate means of preserving our life. An obligation. So I'll be using that word obligatory. Number 5, the duty to preserve life is not absolute. We can reject extraordinary, disproportionate means. So there are times when we have to say, as John Paul II said, let me go to the Father's house. So we can, we don't have to continue to keep somebody on a respirator who has already suffered 5 bouts of pneumonia and is 88 years old. Why? There's and they're in the imminent stages of dying, you can remove the ventilator. So that's an example. We'll talk a bit more about that. Number 6, quality of life is not the decisive factor in determining the use or non-use of medical means to sustain life. Expunge that word out of your considerations. And number 7, without health of spirit, and that's why we have to be spiritually prepared. High technology focused strictly on the body offers limited hope for healing the whole person. We are a composite of body and soul. We never forget that. Invoke the Holy Spirit always. Everything we do, we should do all things as Father John said. May that we do everything that we do in the name of the Father, the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Invoke the Holy Spirit throughout. Next slide. Okay. Only Dr. Kevorkian could make it on Time Magazine, or only Time Magazine would allow him to be on the cover. Beware of the language of compassion. I've already said how it promotes this misunderstanding of us as inefficient beings who should just get it over with. And they use the language of compassion very persuasively. And what they do is they equate our dignity with the ability of our life to live a life of value and quality. You ever seen those advertisements for medicines and stuff where you see some woman or guy jumping up and down out on the beach, they're in midair, their arms back, and none of us could do that now, but it's, they make it look like, oh, that's the quality of life we're supposed to have. No, we get saturated with these messages that really just mask the lie. And that's exactly what Pope Francis said. How great a lie lurks behind certain phrases which so insist on the importance of quality of life that they make people think that lives affected by grave illnesses are not worth living. Next slide. All right, burdens and benefit. To treat or not to treat. So, many people would like a list. Can't you just give me a black and white list of those things that we can do, or things we should treat or should not treat? It's impossible. They change. A diagnosis or condition and the treatment. It can change with time and circumstances. Other symptoms can manifest themselves that complicate something that we thought was easy to treat. Patient could begin to deteriorate. So it's impossible to do so. These potential benefits, and that's the way to think of it, potential benefits and potential burdens change according to time. And it does require that honest and prayerful discernment. So we should really get ourselves into a good discipline of praying daily. And beyond the Mass, to invoke the Holy Spirit. Benefit, simply the health benefit and the hope it offers. That's pretty cut, clear, and dry. Burdens are to the patient, but can be to those in the extended family as well. Burdens are defined as in 4 aspects. Great effort. A certain means may entail great difficulty. It could involve severe pain. When it exceeds what a person can bear. Repugnance. Think about cancer of the jaw, the maniple, where they might actually have to remove a part of a person's jaw. Some of these things can carry great repugnance with it, and fear too. Think about what amputation was before anesthesia. Now people don't think twice about an amputation of a gangrenous limb or for a diabetic because it can be done under the very best of medical conditions and can give that person the longevity of life that they need that they won't have if they continue to keep this limb. And also expense. Exotic cures, one need not bankrupt themselves. I hear there's a treatment in Mexico that, will bankrupt to the family. So, but these are the things that kind of fall under burden. Benefit, health benefit, and the hope that it offers, and then the burdens, those that require great efforts, severe pain, repugnance, and expense. Next slide. There we go. All righty. Important to note, burdensome treatment does not equate to burdensome life. So we're talking about our life with the treatment. We're not talking about the treatment itself necessarily. So we have to evaluate very carefully these benefits and burdens. Those that concern treatment, not continued life with the disease. So we may want to include our continued life with this particular ailment, but that's not what the focus is. The focus is upon the treatment, the burden of the treatment, or the burdens associated with the treatment, not our life with that particular disease or condition. And we must also caution ourselves to avoid overstating not only the burdens of a treatment, but the hoped-for benefits of a treatment. Because we can be unrealistic at times. We can want a loved one to be to recover so much that we have an exaggerated belief in the benefits of a treatment that really only offer maybe marginal results. And we can also overstate the burdens too. So we got to be careful how we do both of those. Is that kind of clear? Clear as mud? Yeah. All right, next slide. To help us, next slide. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, working with the the National Catholic Bioethics Center, has come up with a wonderful document. It's very, very short. I can't believe I forgot to bring it with me, as well as my manual for practitioners of healthcare. But their ethical religious directives cover from beginning of life to end of life, hospital administration, even the sale of hospitals. But it's a thin little document. And when we come to the end of life issues with treatment and end of life decisions, there's 12 directives that speak to those decisions. We're only going to focus on 6. So you've already gotten most of the information that you need in order to better understand. But the 3 that not big of the bigger explanation are basically those 3 that talk about how we should identify in advance a representative to make healthcare decisions for us. And there's also the free informed consent of the patient or the surrogate, and free informed consent. Those are numbered there with a little bit of information, but time-wise, next slide. So part 5 is where we get into those 12 directives that speak to medical treatment and end-of-life decisions. We're only going to talk about those 6, 56 through 61. The last of which is pain management, but you can see number 60 deals with euthanasia. 59, the withdrawal of life-sustaining life support. 58, nutrition, hydration, and then we get into those first 2, extraordinary, ordinary, and disproportionate means. So, and these paragraphs are very, very easy to read, too. There's only a few sentences to each one, and it's in your packets right behind that first document that shows you how to prepare your advanced directives. So here's where we get into basically the obligatory versus the optional treatment. So you have in number 56, that which is considered the obligatory, ordinary, proportionate treatment. And number 57 speaks to those that are optional treatment, which is the extraordinary and disproportionate. Okay, so let's focus on the ordinary and proportionate. This basically states that we have an obligation to use ordinary or proportionate means. So that's where the benefits exceed the burdens of the treatment. So ordinary just means that those in the judgment of the patient, not loved ones necessarily, judgment of the patient offers reasonable hope of benefit. It does not entail excessive burden to the patient or to the family, and they do not impose excessive expense to family or community. So again, we might think of this as the scales that we have there. So the burdens can be equal or exceed the burdens. So that's where we say anything where we can see the benefits exceed the burdens of the treatment as being obligatory. So I think that's kind of clear. If it's not, please say so. And here's where we kind of get into a little bit more of that word of what proportionate means. Proportionate clarifies why some means are ordinary. Because you can have something that may be seemingly ordinary but be disproportionate, and that's why it may tip the scale in the opposite direction. So proportion just clarifies why some means are ordinary. And it means that the benefit is proportionate to the burden. And it may be that it gives time to heal. If you're a 14-year-old and you've been in a terrible car accident and you need time to heal, that ventilator can be considered ordinary because it's going to give the body time to heal enough so that the person, that 14-year-old, can breathe on their own. But if you're 88 years old and you've had pneumonia for your 5th time and you need to put you on a ventilator, and you're also suffering other things, and your health is already showing signs of it, being in imminent stages of dying, you may say, this is disproportionate. The burdens exceed the benefits. So benefits and burdens can change according to circumstances and times. So, I mean, this can be like a ping pong game sometimes. I mean, those scales can be banging up and down sometimes and swinging wildly from one side to the other. So you just have to understand this, that sometimes it can be very difficult. And that's why you shouldn't be alone with these occasions, and when you have questions, there are people you can ask. Okay, next slide. Number 57 does speak to the extraordinary and disproportionate means. So here, this is when we can forego treatment, and it's considered optional if the foreseen burdens exceed the hoped-for benefits, reasonably expected. And extraordinary basically means that those that, in the judgment of the patient, again, they do not offer reasonable hope of benefit. They entail excessive, disproportionate burden, and they impose excessive expense on family or even the community. So, hopefully, those big words are starting to become a little bit clearer. And disproportionate clarifies why some means are extraordinary. So the burden is disproportionate to the hoped-for benefit. And even though it can be morally good, it may not be obligatory. It may sound like, it really is something that, we could go with, but again, if the burdens exceed the benefits, then we can reasonably say no to it. Now, we may decide that we want to. Nothing says that you can't accept to receive an extraordinary, disproportionate treatment. But it's just a conscious decision that you got to make. But again, we must avoid over-exaggerating both the benefits and the burdens. Again, prayerful discernment. Number 58. My father had a peg tube for a good year and a half. Every day I had to go home and feed him because a CNA could not do it. Why a CNA could not do a simple thing of filling a bolus up with that fluid, and even though they like to give it intravenously, you can give it straight into the tube, the bolus tube, with a peg tube. But it is, even though it's artificially administered, it's still considered ordinary because the burdens are not, there's no burdens to having an IV in our arm to receive artificial hydration. I mean, think about the fact when you're a baby, you're spoon-fed a meal. Well, that's delivered by something other than, by means other than yourself feeding yourself. And so, again, an IV or a peg tube, nasal tube, that may not be the most comfortable. But we just have to remember that the gospel mandate to give drink to the thirsty and food to the hungry exists even in healthcare, even when we're undergoing medical treatment, because it's not a medical treatment. Artificial nutrition hydration is part of what we consider ordinary care. So we should always presume in favor of artificial nutrition and hydration. Staying hydrated is very important. There are some exceptions, though. Next slide. Those exceptions are when the patient can't assimilate it. If someone is in the imminent stages of dying, forcing food especially into their bodies, I mean, they can't assimilate it. It can actually become very painful. Maybe they've been on dialysis and their body's not assimilating the fluids. And I've seen this, where fluids basically start to come out of the pore of their skin. And so pushing fluids at that time is not a smart thing to do. I mean, basically you're drowning the person in their own bodily fluids. So there are exceptions, but they're rare. Again, we should always presume in favor of artificial nutrition and hydration. And again, if it's causing discomfort to the person, then yes. I mean, if they're within 24 hours of dying and the doctor says there's no hope, and they are uncomfortable because of the fluids they're receiving and the passing of those fluids, there can be occasions when you can say, yes, it's time. but it's not it cannot be the cause of death. Death by dehydration should never be the cause of one's death. Okay. Free informed judgment concerning use or withdrawal of life-sustaining procedures. My sister had a cerebral embolism, and she was out on her bicycle, fit. I thought she'd been running marathons all her life, and she lived down in the retirement community of the Villages in Florida, and was on her bike and just collapsed right there in the road. A nurse happened to be driving by and saw her and started CPR right away. Ambulance, she coded twice on the way to the hospital. My other sister showed up, and at that point they had her on a ventilator. And my older sister is not Catholic. She called me up in tears and said, "What do I do?" So we got more medical information, and the doctor said, it's irreversible, and her body is starting a slow shutdown. And in that moment, I said we can remove the ventilator. It's easier to say to withhold a particular life-sustaining treatment than it is to withdraw it. But in those instances, we can do so with a clear conscience, because, again, we don't have an obligation to prolong human life unnecessarily. In this particular case, that embolism was too destructive, and the hope for recovery was a given. And so, in those very emotional moments, you can withdraw life-sustaining treatment such as a ventilator. Again, we have to look at those burdens versus the benefits. And it becomes clear at times that there's no benefit to be provided. But if that patient is young and there is that hope, we can decide to sustain that person with this artificial means. But there may be a time when we have to admit that it's time to withdraw it. And as I said, emotionally, it's easier to withhold than it is to withdraw the medical treatment. Okay. Euthanasia. The word comes from Greek, which means good death. And when you get into the subject of good death, think about what the word good birth means. Eugenics. And those are the two bookends of the culture of death. Eugenics and euthanasia, who attack life at its most vulnerable, when it's most innocent in the womb, and particularly when we're most vulnerable, when we're elderly and ill and infirm and suffering. And so the language is compassionate, and it may be even an omission instead of an active measure. But it could be an active or an active omission that of itself, by intention, causes death in order to alleviate suffering. The ethical religious directives say very clearly, terminally ill have the right to die in total serenity and with Christian dignity, and even that they be allowed to die in their own homes if such is their wish. John Paul II wanted to die in the papal apartments. That was his home, not in the hospital. And so we have to understand the very, sometimes compassion just means being present to another. It doesn't mean we have the answers, but it does mean that we be there for them. Anybody seen the most recent movie called Devotion? The Korean War pilots, one had to crash land, and it was in the winter during the Chinese offensive, and he was trapped in the wreckage, and his wingman intentionally crashes his plane crash lands next to him and runs over to try to help him get out. And he is unable to, and a rescue helicopter comes in, and they can't get him out of the wreckage. He's trapped in it, and he finally succumbs to the elements and blood loss. But at the Medal of Honor ceremony, when President Truman gives him his Medal of Honor, his wingman's widow was there, and he was the first black aviator. And so there was a great love between these two men, one white, one black. And his widow, afterwards, there's a scene in the movie where he says, "I'm sorry, I couldn't do what you wanted me to do." She goes, "You did exactly what I asked you to do. I just asked that you be there for him." Sometimes that's all we can do. I'm sorry, I've seen a lot of death in my days, and you're there for people the best you can. That's compassion. Okay, next slide. All right. Pain management. We have to remember that patients should be kept free of pain as possible. We're not asking you to be martyrs in a heroic way. You can withhold some of these pain medications if you so desire. I mean, there's a heroic case of a young girl who's up for beatification in Italy, and she deliberately asked to withhold some of the pain treatments because she wanted to offer more up to Jesus for souls. I don't know that I'm that heroic, but we do have we are allowed to receive pain medication. Now, I don't know about hydrocodone and Percocet. That stuff, I think, is just plain evil. It just scrambles your brain. After my spinal abdominal surgery, they put me on. After 3 days, I couldn't sleep. It was like a false sleep. I was sleeping, but I wasn't sleeping. I was exhausted. I cut a cold turkey, and the doctor was like, "I'd never had anybody do that before." I was like, "You can give me ibuprofen, but that's it." That stuff is evil. I'll take the morphine, but not the Percocet or the hydrocodone. But people are different. But the important thing is that, yes, we need to be able to die comfortably and with dignity and in a place of our choosing, but we want to be able to prepare for our death in a very as conscious of a way as we can. And that's sometimes the byproduct of pain management, is that we lose some of some of that ability to be conscious of our circumstances and the moments. Sometimes we want to make amends with loved ones that we fell out with during the course of our life. Maybe we still want to be able to communicate with family members that are flying in from out of state and can't be there for 3 days, and we want to be cognizant of their presence and have our clarity of mind to communicate the things in our heart. There can be many reasons for how we approach pain management, but it's important that we try not, especially when we're the ones making the decision for a loved one that may be not able to make those decisions of themselves, maybe because of dementia, whatever the reasons be, that sometimes we just don't want to try to deprive a person of their consciousness. However, there are times when pain can be so great that you almost have to allow the excessive administration of maybe morphine to treat the pain, like in bone cancer. There are times when your pain can be so great that the pain and the morphine that's administered will prove lethal because it will affect your respiratory system. But in that particular moment, your intention is not to cause a person's death. Your intention is to treat the pain. Now, it's a very fine line that we walk. But when we are in pain and it's becoming so excessive that it's excruciating, we can continue to ask for that pain medication to be given, even though it may start to affect our respiratory system and basically cause our death. Some illnesses, like I said, such as bone cancer, involve incredible pain. But we should suppress it as best we can, even if it may indirectly shorten a person's life, so long as the intent is to treat the pain, not hasten the death. Okay, next slide. Living wills. I already basically spoke a little bit about it at the introduction of this talk, and we're almost done, which is great. Living wills seem to give us better control over our destiny, but in truth, they're just a blunt instrument that can be very directive but we can't possibly know what kind of circumstances we may be hospitalized under with which to start checking blocks off in some of these advanced directives, these living wills that are out there. Okay, yeah, I don't want to be resuscitated. I don't want to. And it's like there was a 57-year-old man, a living will, and he had a copy of it at the hospital. Well, he had a heart attack, and in there he had already selected his living will that he did not want to be resuscitated. And he's been admitted, and they said, well, your living will says that you don't want to be resuscitated. We'll honor your living will. He goes, no, take the paddles out if I go down. I am not leaving my wife that life insurance policy. So you got to be really careful with these living wills. If you have one, get rid of them. Get those 2 documents that I gave you, sign them, get 2 witnesses, make copies of them, put them in an envelope in the glove compartment of your car. Ladies, carry it in the bottom of your pocketbook in an envelope. Have a list of your loved ones to be contacted, list of the medications that you're on, anything else that you want in there. If you know that this is where you're going to live, you may even want to go ahead and bring it to the hospital at some point so they already have it in the system. But the bottom line is have it handy and have those things that you want communicated should all of a sudden the unexpected happen. But patients should not be deprived of, I'm just looking at my notes here, and a different one. So those written options can be very, very problematic, and they're not morally legitimate for every circumstance that we may find ourselves in. So it really is a slippery slope to euthanasia. So I like this best. Living wills basically are an exercise in speculation. Whereas what we promote in front of you, you're basically saying, I want to be treated in accordance with the ethical religious directives of the Catholic teaching and that which is communicated in these other documents. And if there's a question, hospitals all have a board of bioethicists or ethicists that review tough cases. And they'll look at that, and they understand that. They respect they should. A lot of the Protestants, they really respect our ethical religious directives because they don't have that sort of guide to help them with end-of-life decisions. And a lot of Protestant doctors don't necessarily appreciate these, even though they get ethics courses. So, all right, and no sense to dwell on this because you got it in there, but just what it says in that highlighted portion. What I state here is general in nature, since I cannot anticipate all the possible circumstances of future illness. And that basically sums it up in a nutshell. Okay, next slide. And the same with the healthcare appointment. Just be careful who you choose. Make sure they don't have any, make sure you paid all your prior debts to them before you allow them to make their medical decisions, Okay, next. In the interest of time, I am going to this is a document you will be confronted with. It's called a Physician's Order of Life-Sustaining Treatment. And it really is a two-edged sword. What I will say to you is after you get by this guide to Catholic end-of-life decisions, then there's another document on palliative care and hospice care, and they're only several pages long. Again, easy to read. And then you're going to get into the document on pulse forms. And there's a sample pulse form within this document to read and fill out. So this document, instead of basically reading a slide, you can read the slides as well as I can in the interest of time because we're coming up on noon. This sample pulse form for Catholics is your best guide, and it's only a few pages long. And I think you can all handle that much. And maybe you want to divide and conquer. One spouse can read the guide to end-of-life decisions, and the other one can read the pulse form. And then maybe later on you can switch. But it'll at least help you to tag team this together. Because God forbid that the unimaginable happens and you find yourself in a situation and neither one of you have followed through with these packet materials that are there to help you. The right side is the one that basically is where the rubber meets the road. This one on the right side of your packet. The left side, they're more Aside from the number and the web address for the National Catholic Bioethics Center, when Father Dowling was pastor here, he used to call me all the time and say, "Paul, I need some help with a medical decision that a family, a parishioner is dealing with." And if I didn't know the answer, or I had any measure of doubt, I would say, okay, it's time to get the National Catholic Bioethics Center involved. And they have a 24-hour hotline, but it has got to be like a bona fide emergency. If it's something that is not immediately life-threatening, then they ask that you use the email system, and then they will get back to you within 24 hours. And I've used it too. I've had people that have called me and they're at the hospital and they didn't have the means to contact or send an email to the National Catholic Bioethics Center, so I did it for them, and I put their email address because I could read their email on their phones, that their phones had died of a chart, all these different reasons. But so there is a hotline and there is an email address in there that you can use for non-emergencies. But the packet on your right is the most important. And then in the conclusions here, we just have to remember that you can go to the, sorry, you looking at Facebook? My wife does that all the time. I'll be talking to her, I'm like, what are you looking at? She's Facebook. And I said, am I really listening to me or looking at your posting? Hey, I pick up my wife. She's in my life to help me get to heaven. I'll just say this, that anytime I've ever had a complaint about my wife, Jesus has turned it around on me. He says, just think of how much of a problem you are in that same regard to me as my bride. Wives, it can work the other way around, okay? But seriously, when we think about those that are in our life, they're there to help us get to heaven. And it may be in these final moments of life that they really step up to the plate and help us to our heavenly homeland, where we will hope to soon follow. Again, I've been around a lot of death in my life. In the funeral home, I definitely gained an appreciation for the dignity that can be given to the deceased. And it's becoming more and more commonplace to simply have a graveyard service instead of a funeral mass. Please, for the love of God, for the love of your loved ones, plan your funeral mass out. There's a guide, a packet in that left side. It'll take you through some of those things, the readings and stuff. But have a funeral mass. Go for the full menu of what the church offers you for in the process of dying, having the sacrament of the anointing. Have a funeral mass, because the great is your dignity, great is your sending off, and Protestants can't even come close to the holy sacrifice of the Mass celebrated as part of a funeral, because your sacrifice of your entire life is now basically being caught up in that holy sacrifice of the Mass. I mean, I even bought, even though I'm not a priest, I have all the sacramentals for the celebration of the funeral mass, of the wedding, the blessing of an altar, because it all applies to us. You're temples of the Holy Spirit, you have an altar, you've been sacrificing all your life. Why wouldn't you want to have all of your sacrifices of your life represented in that holy mass and offered with you in that committal? So, I thank you all for your great patience. It's 1 minute and 45 seconds after 12 noon. You drank from the